Hey guys. It's true, I'm the last speaker. I am everything that stands in between us and partying. So, we'll make this interesting and fun, I hope. Thank you to all the organizers for keeping us caffeinated and mostly on schedule. I'm going to talk about fact-checking and how to do it quickly and how to do it in such a way that people actually want to read it so that it's not just dry. That is actually a story, because I think Thomas made some really great points in his presentation. Data is one thing, facts are one thing, but in order for it to be a story that connects with people, there needs to be a little bit more substance there. So this is me. If you're a tweeting kind, I am Lacey-Bordeaux on Twitter. I work for CNN, I have since 2008. I recently moved from Atlanta in the other Georgia to Washington, D.C. So I'm working with our political reporters and producers, and I'm making sure that before we publish anything, that it's perfect, that it's correct, that it's not going to be offensive, we're not missing any angles. I'm keeping the network honest before any of you see it. So that means that I'm very concerned with facts first, which is actually CNN's new slogan, and that's where we start. That's where we start with storytelling. So it used to be the case, at least in the United States, that we did fact-checking mostly during campaigns. And that's because candidates are on the road, they're making a lot of claims, they're competing for voters, right? And one of the key components of any healthy democracy is access to information, right? So as journalists, one of the things that we do during those campaigns is saying, okay, let's verify, let's figure out what's true and what's not. But increasingly, we've been fact-checking not just in campaign seasons, but all the time. So this is something that we've been experimenting with a little bit recently. Instead of doing like a full article, the final debate, CNN's reality check team vets the claims, this is something that we do quite quickly. So this is a claim that President Trump made recently. He said that other presidents don't call Gold Star families. And Gold Star families are military families who have lost someone in combat. And so we said, okay, this is an important claim that we need to fact check. And we did it right here, right on the screen. Everybody who's watching can see. Trump, other presidents didn't call Gold Star families, and then in parentheses, they did. That's our quick fact check. People can see it right away. We've also started fact checking in real time on TV. And of course, we stream our TV as well, so you can get it in real time. Every day, the White House holds a press briefing. And what we've started doing is when we hear things in the press briefing that need to be fact checked, we put those right up on the screen. So you don't have to click through. The information is right there, right when you hear it. So, people talk about post-truth era. I think that this is kind of a fad term. This is some data. This is Google data that shows interest over time in the term post-truth. I don't know if you can see, but over here, this is January of 2017, all the way to current. So you can see, interest it's declining, but it's still pretty high. But if you zoom out, you can see that really the interest in this term spiked in November of last year. So I think we're coming back down. People are starting to sort of search for this term less. And in any event, when you're a journalist, you're in the business of truth. And so fact-checking is always going to matter. This is a core responsibility of journalists to disseminate, to seek the truth and to disseminate it. That's what we do. And part of the reason that this really matters, and this matters for any brand, not just a media brand, but this matters for any brand. Trust is everything. Consumers have a lot of choice, and one of the reasons that they come to your brand, they check out your website, they go to Outriders because they trust Jakob, right? So it matters for CNN too. We have to build and maintain trust with our audience. And this is a good news slide from my perspective. So this shows a Reuters poll, and it shows that since the election of Donald Trump, that actually trust in the media has gone up, while trust in the executive branch has declined. And that's something that's important because this is a president who has decided to attack the journalists and who cover him and media in general. He was just returning to the United States and tweeting about CNN just 2 hours ago. So that continues. But actually, it shows some good news if you care about journalism, which I do. But we're not out of the woods yet. There is worrying news. So this is another poll from Politico that shows 46% of Americans in this Politico poll believe that the media make up stories about Trump. And here's where data and fact-checking are really, really important. Because this is an emotional thing. People believe this, right? And this is, oh, here's the data behind that poll for anyone who's really interested in the deep dive. But this is where data is really important, because when we're telling stories, sometimes we're telling stories that conflict with the emotional reactions that people have, right? Terrorism is something that people are really concerned about. That's an emotional reaction people have when they think about terrorism, and justifiably so. This is a frightening thing, right? But we decided to do a story on the travel ban, and we said, okay, ISIS, terrorist organization, how many people have been arrested in the United States from the countries that are covered under the travel ban? This is where data comes in. This is where data helps us with trust, right? Because people want to know, how do you know this information? We're frightened about terrorism. How do you know? So what we found is actually there have been some people in the United States who have been arrested. That's the little red line down here. There are some people from those countries who have been arrested, but the bulk of the people arrested for ISIS-related offenses are Americans from the United States, born in the United States. That's what we found. And we used data from the government itself. We used data about these prosecutions, and that's how we found this information, right? And for the workshop on Friday, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about some of these data sets. I don't naturally gravitate towards spreadsheets, but they're really, really critical, and they help us organize our work. Another thing to think about when you're thinking about storytelling and data is sometimes the story isn't what information is in the data itself. Sometimes the data is missing something. And that's actually where the story is. So this is a story that I did in 2010, so 7 years ago now. And basically, every year in the United States, the FBI publishes crime data. And this is another story that people really care about, right? Like, crime is another emotional story. People worry about crime. The FBI tells people how many murders there were in the United States, how many arsons, how many robberies, and how many rapes. But when I was looking at their data, what I saw was they weren't counting men as rape victims. They were completely ignoring an entire category of victims. They were using the same definition since 1929. So I published this story. Some other people published this story too. 3 years later, the FBI changed their definition. And as you can see, there was a 41% increase. And just by changing the definition, right? So when you're thinking about data, sometimes the story is what's not there. And that's something just to think about, because the great thing about data is it allows us to be curious. But sometimes we have to ask ourselves, what aren't we seeing? But sometimes we don't have 3 years to wait for the FBI to change their definition. Sometimes we have to be quick, like I was showing you earlier. So this is the White House Press Secretary, Sarah Sanders, at approximately 4 p.m. on October 24th. She talked about some of the things that she's proud of that Donald Trump has done as the 45th President of the United States. And she says he's brought unemployment to a 16-year low, and he's created over 1.7 million jobs. That's something we can fact check. So we looked at that really quickly, and about 2 hours later we published this, and we found that he created about 1.1 million, not 1.7, 1.1. So this is how we got that data really quickly. And this is something just for anybody who's interested in any kind of fact checking, whether you're a journalist or not. Some of these websites, the data's right there, but they're not exactly the most friendly websites. They're not putting it all out there for you. So you can get really friendly with these websites before you need them. Play around with them, see what data they have. And so with this one, we just knew we were looking at these months, and then you can just really quickly take the data that you want, pop it into Google, throw a couple plus signs in between, and really quickly you spit out your answer. So this is something that's really helpful when speed is of essence. So the other thing to keep in mind is data doesn't have to be dry. Oh, do I not have audio? I think actually there's a problem with this audio. But this is a way of using the same concept. This is fact-checking the White House press secretary. But instead of writing a text piece or putting something on a banner, sometimes you can just use video. This is something that, of course, Jon Stewart, John Oliver, these guys have done a lot of, right? And this is something that news organizations can do too. This stuff doesn't have to be dry. Tell a story that is going to keep people interested, right? Facts first, but keep people engaged. So, to make it quick and interesting, before a live event, think about what kind of facts might be referenced. Get comfortable with those facts. Develop a familiarity with websites that are kind of wonky and dry. Play around with them before you need them. That way you know exactly where you're going when you need the data. Know the talking points better than the talking heads. That's a very TV term, of course, but no matter what medium you're working in, there are going to be people who are the experts. But you can know the area almost as well as they do and anticipate what they're going to say. Ask for data. Ask for any data that you can. And then you never know when you're going to need it. That data may be sitting around until one day it becomes useful to you. I'll talk a little bit more about that on Friday as well. Learn to love spreadsheets. That's almost one that I've put on there for myself because I don't so much love spreadsheets. They're a little dry, but they're essential for organizing information because a lot of this is like a lot of data. I was listening to the presentation on figuring out who downed the Malaysian airliner, right? And that's a lot of information to keep track of. And I loved that we heard the whole story of how that came to be. Because that's a bunch of steps, right? But you got to keep it organized. Play with format. That's really essential because you need to go where your audience is. If your audience isn't watching TV anymore, you need to be on Snapchat. Be read in. Just if you're covering an area, know what's happening every day, read a lot, and dig deep, ask yourself questions about the stuff that you're seeing. What are you curious about? What's missing? Ask your friends, ask your colleagues, ask your neighbors, ask your parents. What are they interested in? And all of this, I think, gets us to a more interesting place when it comes to using data for storytelling and fact-checking. And that's all I've got. Thank you. I look forward to chatting to all of y'all.